How are things?
Yeah, things are good. Yes, it's been an interesting time coming off the back of the last year being such a strange year. To suddenly everything here seems to be opening up again a bit more, and people seem to be doing stuff a bit more now.
Oh, that's good. Yeah,
How's everything? Yeah.
we're opening up pretty fast, even though like there's still like there's parts of the United States. Well, they're mostly like the conservative parts of the United States that are still like COVID heavy.
Hmm.
But in New York, we seem to be doing well, and we're opening back up pretty fast and pretty hard. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like the similar sort of situation here, where it's just very quickly everything seems to be changing. There's a part of me though that kind of misses the. I feel like when you're sort of like trapped in a way, you can sometimes be forced to deal with yourself, and sometimes some good sort of artistic stuff can come from that. So I miss that aspect, but I also obviously it's nice to be able to actually meet up with people again and do stuff properly.
Yeah, honestly, like I don't think fractals would have been the same had I been in more contact with people. Is it such an insular vibe?
Yeah, and it comes across. I mean, I was thinking about that. I was thinking it's interesting how and impressive really that you managed to kind of, with the restrictions, kind of turn that into, the whole kind of feeling of the film is that kind of sort of handheld almost, just going with it and very naturalistic kind of outcome, which I feel probably. I mean, I don't know how you had it planned initially, but I'd imagine that it had some part to do with the fact that you had that limitation of,
Yeah,
you know.
well, the handheld look. So I love that look, and I've been trying to make it work for my own aesthetic for years, like more than 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
And and more, it's starting to fit into what I do. It doesn't work for everything I do, but it's gotten to a point where like I've had clients who recognize my work simply by the way I hold the camera. Like it's super weird getting an email from a client like, "Hey, I saw this thing in an ad, and I think you might have shot it." I'm like, "Yeah, I did shoot it." I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing because I don't use like steady cams or glide cams or like everything is just natural as much as possible. And I think that kind of that feeds into sort of that vibe you were just describing. But also, like, when we first started shooting the movie, it was a different cast and nothing got locked down. We weren't sure what was happening in
Hmm.
China. We shot for 4 days and it looked more like a mainstream movie.
Hmm.
Like, I haven't shown you any of that footage, but it
That'd
looked
be
more
very
like,
interesting.
yeah. Well, I'll probably put it up as a special feature at some point, but hold on, I'm getting a Zoom notification that we're supposed to
Sure.
talk. Um, but like the lighting was better. It was cleaner. I took a lot
Hmm.
more time, kind of, the highlights and all the background lighting, and it
Hmm.
just looked like a movie. Whereas
Yeah, yeah,
mine looks like an art house film at this point. And so
yeah.
it's just like what you would expect to see from, I don't know, a $300,000 feature film versus a no budget film, right?
Hmm.
It's basically the difference. But
It's
there's
an interesting one. I feel like with the um, talking about when you're saying about the difference between like how people can pick up your style. Do you ever find that maybe a bit of that comes from your origins? Because I remember when we worked, the first thing that we did together was I've forgotten what it was called, but that the film you did, I think, when you were 19.
Yeah, so I'll give some context to the listeners. So I met Scott because I hired him to do some visual effects shots, actually, for the restoration of my short film Hero for a Day.
How's it here for a
Yeah,
day?
Hero for a Day was the first movie I made out of film school. It's very much a post 9/11 movie. It's very much rooted in a young, naive, conspiratorial male mindset. I wouldn't say it's a great movie. At this point, it's a movie that I had to restore because all that raw footage has more meaning for me than the actual movie. Because I grew up with every single person in that movie. And I grew up on that island where we shot. And I don't live there anymore. And I don't know those people anymore. How they look now is nothing how I remember them. So whenever I go back and I see them, I'm like, huh? And then I'll go back to New York for a few years, and they'll always revert in my brain as being from the version
How
of
they
like
were.
footage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I can't, my brain won't update them. And so I'm like, I got to archive this. And the only way I'm going to seriously archive this footage is if I do a full restoration of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it was kind of a practice run for what's coming, because I'm really into this idea of kind of taking all my old content and seeing what I can do with it as more of a side project.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we never did with that movie is we didn't do proper visual effects. So, you know, I went online, I found you helped me with some of the visual effects. And then I found out you're a sound mixer. You have an ear for music and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't. So I'm like, all right, why don't I hire you to do this as well? Because I wouldn't mind having a proper sound design too. And everything that I couldn't do when I first made the movie, I wanted to do for this. And you were kind of instrumental in actually giving me that capability. So
Thank you.
that's how we met. I got a camera over here. I'm going to occasionally talk to you. That's how we met, everybody.
Sure.
And so going back to the shooting style is really, it's out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
I can't afford insurance for permits. In the United States, that's a massive hustle.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where it's kind of dodgy, right? To get a permit in any town, you need at least $1 million insurance policy to shoot anything. The moment you put tripod down, you're at risk of getting fined. So everything gets handheld, no matter what, no matter how small or large we are. And in New York, even though you can legally use a tripod, there are certain security and NYPD people from the 9/11 era who just don't give a shit. If you're filming, you're a potential terrorist. So I rooted my whole aesthetic in just handheld. The only time you see it tripoded is if we were in an open space where there aren't a lot of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Or in the basement. All that basement footage.
It's interesting because I feel like, because obviously I sort of make films here and there when I'm not working on other stuff. And it's funny because when we did the Hero for a Day, the one thing that really made me like keen to kind of take the project on, because at that point, and even with Fractals, I'd gotten to a point where I sort of decided externally only to work on stuff that I actually, you know, not just for financial reasons, but going on, is this something I would like to be a part of? And it's interesting because Hero for a Day really reminded me of a lot of the films that me and my brother would make when I was a bit younger. And in that whole kind of, you know, getting old camcorders and just going out and filming. And I just really could relate to kind of what you're doing. And it's funny because we did a film back in like, you know, when I think I was 10 and my brother was 12. And it was kind of a similar premise as all the sort of friends we had at the time in this film. And when a few years back, I decided, I want to try and add VFX and all this. And I actually never finished with that. But as soon as you kind of explained the project, I just instantly was like, I understand exactly where this is, you know, what the intention is here. And so from that, I kind of felt, you know, real understanding and a desire to kind of work on it. And obviously that led on to Fractals. But no, it makes a lot of sense with the handheld as well. Like saying it can be tough here as well, filming, you know, you have to pay a lot of money and you have to, you know, clear it. And we've had it in the last few years, shoots where, you know, police have shown up or, you know, it's gotten a bit risky, especially if using certain props and stuff. But I can imagine in New York as well, especially, it must be, a real challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back in 2013, I had this disaster shoot. It's the only union shoot I ever directed. And we had the proper permits.
Mm-hmm.
And it was for a night shoot. It was in a relatively deserted area, though there were houses on the end that if they looked, they could see us, but we weren't intrusive. Mm-hmm. But they kept calling the fire department on us just to fuck with us, just to slow us down. And so
just to mess it up.
Our permit was a hard out at 11 p.m. And we barely made the deadline because of that. And, you know, I ended up writing to all the houses on that block later to Anonymous, whoever lives here. Just so you know, we could have been out in like 30 minutes had you just not slowed us down. But it took 3 hours because of this. Just to let you guys know in case you do it to someone else.
It's crazy how people can oppose to it as well. Like we went just before Christmas, just when there was a brief window where it wasn't a lockdown here and you could just kind of do stuff outdoors. Me and a friend decided to do. He was directing a film and I was doing some acting in it, and we went just on this road and it was very quiet late at night, and this one guy drives up the road and he starts saying, "What are you doing here? When are you going?" And obviously we were polite about it, but some people, they're just really there. But it could be a nightmare with permits as well. I remember once we were doing a music video because aside from films, me and my brother are in a band as well that we have, and we were doing the video for it and a friend was helping us shoot it, and we were doing something a bit daring where basically he was in the back of, I guess what was the trunk of the car, kind of driving with it open. Someone's grabbing hold of him, trying to get like this shot of this other car. And we got a permit, obviously not to do that, but to film on the road. But it turned out we'd booked the wrong road and there wasn't enough time to change it. So we just had to like go in and say, hopefully we don't get arrested. Luckily it was okay, but that was a close shave.
Yeah, I've done that shit too, where like the area I might not be able to get a permit for various reasons. Sometimes in New York especially, so much of the property is co-managed by the city and a private organization. So
Right.
the city won't issue a permit. So I'll get a permit for like one block over and just sneak over to where I want to be and just be like, oops.
Yeah.
If I get caught, it's oops, sorry guys, bye. And that helps. That also helps not having a large setup, because the more you look like a tourist or something, the better. Like I such an advocate for no budget like modes of operation. Even if you have a budget, just stay under the radar.
Yeah,
like,
just try and do
to
it.
show off. Just make the movie, capture what you need to in your frame, and call it a day.
I always think of that. Is it 28 Days Later? The one where basically, I think it's like Cillian Murphy, and they shot it in London, and because they wanted the street clear, I don't know if they got a permit or not, but I think they just went at like 5 or like 4 in the morning, and it looked, because it was like a zombie movie, and I think it was relatively low budget, but because they went so early, there was just no one around, and so it looks like they've paid and they've had all the streets cleared, but they were just shooting so early.
Was that Alex Garland who did that? He did The Beach.
I'm not sure actually. I think it was. I've forgotten the name.
I think I know what movie you're talking about. I think it's the guy who did The Beach. I don't know if you remember The Beach.
I don't remember it stars Cillian Murphy from the Peaky Blinders and like Inception. I haven't actually seen it, but I've seen the clips of this
I don't watch zombie movies, so
no, I'm not.
I only know certain things based on people's resumes. So
Sure. You just kind of go pick things out.
Yeah. Moving forward with this story, we finished Hero for a Day. For those interested, it's not out yet. By the time you see this podcast, it still won't be out. It is scheduled to go live on YouTube in August of 2022, because that's the 20th anniversary of the making of that movie. That was also the movie that got me to New York. And I shot on mini DV camcorders for the first 10 years I was here. Mm-hmm. That whole thing you described, just getting together with a camcorder and going to make a movie,
just like jumping out and doing
it. That to me is the romance, and that's I think that's why I'm obsessed with going back into this footage. And I've been doing it again with my first New York movie. You've probably seen some of the posts.
I've seen some come up on YouTube.
Yeah,
there is a magic though. There really is. I feel with those older cameras. I even wonder if, because I've tried shooting with like good cameras, but in that style, and it's too clean. There's something about the charm I find of just this. Yeah, it's almost like black and white. We
shot Fractals in 6K resolution on a Blackmagic, and I dirtied that shit up. I brought down the resolution to 2K. I was adding all kinds of color passes on it just to make it a little more interesting, because it's so crisp and clean, but it's not necessarily gorgeous. Mm-hmm. Or light or alive. Like there's an aliveness to, I don't know, just analog
Yeah.
content.
Yeah, it's like the whole film versus digital in general, where you kind of have that. It's a strange. I mean, I'd worked with DV tapes when I did like media. Well, it's called college here, but it's not like colleges in America. It's like when you're sort of 16 to 18 kind of thing. So just before you'd be at that age. But we shot with DV tapes then. But when I was younger, unfortunately, it was just as DV had kind of started to go, and it was turning into like SD cards. Because when we properly started like filming stuff, I was 10, and I'm 21 now, so this was sort of 2010, and so by then obviously DV had just started to kind of fade out. But I wish I'd had more chance, because there's something about as well the tapes, like the way you like pop them in. And
Oh yeah, so I've been doing it all night trying to. I bought this really junky eBay camcorder, which I have to return, but I've been putting them in, push it in, it takes it down, and then you put the clasp over it, and then it's in.
Yeah,
and it's a massive process.
it's magical though.
Have you shot on celluloid film yet?
As in just like general film.
Yeah, film.
Oh, yeah. So me and my brother, like, I think it was just because we just always have creative projects. So we have the band together, and then we do films together, and we're just about to start filming one now. But I think when I was 14 and he was 16, we decided let's get Super 8 out and go. And we've now moved up to 16 millimeter.
Oh, nice.
Which is obviously pricey, but we're kind of reserving that for certain projects. But we're with a group of friends. We've been working on this big documentary project that we're quite excited about since 2016 we started. And that a lot of that is shot on film. So over the years, we've just been kind of saving up and getting loads of rolls of Super 8 to kind of, But that is a completely different experience than digital.
Oh yeah, and it's so, like here, it's a little tough because the only labs that can really process it well are the really professional labs.
Right.
So you have to have bank to use it. But when you're shooting, where are you sending it to get developed?
So there's actually loads in the UK, just loads of labs that have like really good scanners. So we use just one. I think it's like Two Brothers again or something that I think they're affiliated with Kodak, but they just like do it out of their house. But they have like a 6K scanner, and it's pricey, but it's not over the top. 'Cause there are some in London that are way more, because we live just outside. But there's loads of companies in the UK that seem to do it. There's a few which are like the main ones, but you can get like process paid, so you buy it on their site, and that includes the scanning and the developing. So they send it to you, and then you just send it back with your order number, and then you wait, and it takes a while obviously, but then you just get sent it on Google Drive in like 6K, which is quite cool. And obviously you get the film back.
Seems like you have more resources to keep using film than we do on this side of the pond, so that's nice.
There seems to be a revival at the moment. I see loads of like ads and stuff using Super 8 and stuff at the moment, and I feel like since we got into it, there's been more and more.
It started with Vimeo, I think, because there was this filmmaker on Vimeo who had this idea of scanning a Super 8 positive in like 4K resolution, and people were like, "Holy moly!" I'm like, "Yeah, that's what film can do." Nobody thought of that until like 2016, and so I think that's kind of what like got people thinking more about it, going back to it, and then
and I feel Star Wars,
but Star Wars.
I feel like because when they decided, because obviously the thing was they decided, from my understanding, to shoot The Force Awakens and the new ones on film, not for the stylistic reason, but because of money, right? Because such a big franchise. If they shoot in digital, they're locked into, let's say 8K or whatever they shoot it in. But with film, in 20 years, they can scan it at whatever quality they want, obviously. So I think from a financial standpoint, they said, well, if we shoot on film, we're going to be able to, we don't have to remaster it years down the line. We can just keep rescanning it as long as we preserve the film. And I feel like that sent like a domino reaction of just every major franchise film like slowly moving to film for financial reasons as
Yeah,
well.
it's future proofing. That's what I always called it. Future.
Yeah, future proofing it. Obviously, you have like, you know, the people like Tarantino and that obviously shoot on film because they love film, which is obviously a lot more. I appreciate that a lot more, but you can
Yeah,
understand, you know.
I mean, if I had the backing that they have, I would shoot on film too.
Yeah.
In 2 seconds. My favorite experience as an editor was editing 16 millimeter film on a flatbed table.
Oh wow.
Literally
Yeah.
just cutting the film, taping it together. Then you're doing the same thing to the magnetic stock, which is also 16 millimeter, only it's audio and it's made of metal. And you could get cut on it. It was great. And then you take this taped up monstrosity to a lab, and then they would take your negative and they would carefully just conform your negative. They would cut your negative according to your edits. And then they would have this special glue to like connect the negative together. And then they'd put the negative through a process so that you were getting a print based off that negative, and that was your final movie. And I'm like, such an artistic, crafty process.
And
I
it's like
loved it.
you're using your hands. I mean, we're recording a new album at the moment. We've decided to use a lot more tape. We've gone back to tape, and it's the same as like the equivalent of film because you. Also, it's weird because we did this just I was testing out the tape machine and I rigged it all up to go on separate. I've got an 8-track and a 4-track, and I decided I would do the 8-track. We'll rig everything up, and I started recording onto tape. And the performance got so much better because I just knew I've got one chance to do this. It's the same with film, obviously. We're like, we've got to get it right in this take. But it's crazy because digital, you know, video or film, obviously you have to have the space for it, especially when you're shooting, you know, really high res. But you kind of are like, oh, you know, I've got so, you know, we can do so many takes. It's not such an issue. But there's something about with film. It's like, okay, you got so much film, so much light. We got to get it, and we got to get it now. You know, that pressure I think can be devastating, but it can also really, I think, encourage like production.
Yeah,
As
I
well.
was actually recently after when we were kind of in the zone of fractals where you were in the beginning of mixing
Yeah,
before you got the music. I was actually on eBay looking at those old Nagra recorders with the 1/4-inch tape,
yeah.
and because I'm like I wanted to see what it would take for me to actually start recording all my dialogue on Nagra tape. And those things were down in price a few years ago. Now they're back up in price because people want them again.
Yeah. There was a whole tape revival with like Mac DeMarco and all these like indie musicians who started using 1/4-inch again, and suddenly it went through the roof. I remember a few years ago it was like 150, 200 pounds, and now they're like 850 quid just for like, you know, an 8-track, which is crazy. It's the same kind of with film. I feel like over the next few years, the more people, if it continues, as you know, people to use it as kind of like a trend, I feel like it's gonna shoot up even more for like film cameras and stuff.
Yeah, and I'm actually okay with that. I think that there needs to be an analog normality,
I
just
agree
so
with
that
that.
like, in the event that I'm ever funded for real, I I would totally go analog. I would go on film. I would go on Nagra tape. I would find a sound mixer who's a relic from the '90s who can just come and work that equipment
Yeah,
and just do it analog. I'll
go
digitally
back to
edit
old school.
because, you know, in the end you got to make concessions. But I love the idea of just capturing all the raw material on analog.
Yeah, there's something about it, I think, and it's just it's like knowing that it's like the light is hitting the film, you know, because it's obviously, you know, and I think digital in all, you know, with audio or with film, it provides so much convenience, and it makes it so accessible to everyone, which I think is the pro. But I think what I find so fascinating is I would have thought, you know, with like, you know, film, like cameras becoming digital and audio becoming digital, and kind of with that, everything becoming a lot more affordable. When you look back at kind of the, you know, like cinema and music of the 70s and kind of the 80s a little bit, but, you know, 60s, 70s, there's such a golden era of kind of audio, you know, music as an art form, film as an art form. You kind of end up with this, you know, this era where you think if only they had access to everything. And then now you think everyone has such easy access. You know, someone could just make a movie on their phone, make a song on their phone. And it's crazy that there isn't I mean, there's so much stuff out there, but there isn't that much like, I mean, there's a lot, but there's not those gems I feel as available as they were back then, as it seems. But I wonder if it's because you had to go through such a process to have something made, like to have a record made in the 70s. You know, you had to get signed, you had to go into a studio and use the tape, or with a film, you know. I wonder if because of that pressure and that process, it had to be great.
Yeah. Well, you know, when it was less democratized as it is now, the people who were coming through either were coming through and creating stuff because they already had some level of resources,
Hmm.
or this is all they focused on.
Hmm.
So right now I'm reading a book by Jonas Mekas. Jonas Mekas was an experimental filmmaker who came over to the United States during World War II. His family was killed, and he became one of the founders of the Anthology Film Archives, which is a film museum here in the city.
Hmm.
In a non-COVID era, you would be able to just take your film there and screen it through their new filmmakers series. Like, it's a very accessible place, and it's designed to be because it was founded by an outsider.
Hmm.
And he, based on what I've read in his book, he had to focus all his energies on figuring out how to buy his first Bolex 16 millimeter camera. He talks about his brother and himself put down like a several $100 deposit. I think it was like $300 or $400, and then they had to wait like a month to raise money to buy the rest of it. And then once they took the camera home, this dude was so committed to mastering filmmaking that his diary entries are just full of, I shot X amount of feet today, and it was this, and this. You just go around the city, kind of like what I do. I just go around the city and I film. He's like, all right, I saw X amount of feet on this day. Here's what happened. And this happened at this time, at this frame. And, you know, like, I mean, he documented everything he shot. And I just think that's so cool, and it's so committed. And when it's less democratized and harder to access, that's the kinds of people you get.
Sure, yeah.
At the same time, we live in an era where pretty much anything goes. So you could have a whole channel of people reacting to things with their computer laptops facing them, and that counts as art in certain circles. But then you also have, a few years ago, there was a Sundance winner who shot his whole movie on an iPhone. It was the first mainstream movie to be shot on an iPhone entirely. I don't know if you saw that movie. It was called Tangerine.
I'm not sure. I saw one which was shot on a phone, which was about I think it was like some kind of someone escaping from a mental asylum or something. But I don't think it was the first one to be shot.
No, this was like the first to like really get mainstream notoriety because it won Sundance. It's called Tangerine, and the guy went
I'll
on to
check
make
that
a
out.
movie called The Florida Project. Actually,
Right.
this is a great story. Is he shot his movie on an iPhone, won Sundance, found backers for his next one. He's like, all right, let's shoot film, and so he shot The Florida Project on film, and it looks beautiful, but it's still clearly his movie, his aesthetic. It's just
style.
a different medium.
And I love stories like that because you kind of it really because I feel like there's this trap, and obviously it's because everything is so consumer driven in today's world, where it's kind of like, oh, if you buy this camera, then you'll be able to make a good film, or if you buy this, you know, laptop or this sound desk, you'll be able to make good music. And I feel like because everyone, it's so easy to escape into the gear, which obviously there's like, you can geek out and there's like a fun element to that. And especially, you know, if you have a budget and you kind of have learned, you know, you know what you're doing with it, then obviously that's like, that can be such a great thing to do. But there's this level I feel where people are starting out and you almost feel paralyzed because you look around and you think, oh, I'm going to need this camera to make a good movie. I'm going to need this lighting. And it's kind of like, it's like, you know, as we're talking about going out of just a camcorder and filming, I feel like so many people think, oh, you know, I mean, I've been trying to get more and more into acting, and I've been talking to people and saying, oh, I just need something for my reel. And I'm thinking, obviously it helps to have like, you know, established projects and acting reels, but I'm thinking, you know, you can just, you know, get someone to hold a phone and just come up with a scene. And that's the beautiful thing about having access to all this stuff. You know, you can just position the window right so you've got some good lighting on you. And it's crazy that we live in a time where literally you can just get up and make something and just, and you know, a world where that can happen, where someone can just make a movie on their iPhone and then it can win at a film festival. I think it's just it just says what's possible, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And man, you had me thinking about something else. I forget what it was. That was the perfect like thing I wanted to. Oh yes. So you'd mentioned the phrase, and this is a phrase I threw around a lot when I was young and I was naive and waiting for the right camera, waiting for
Yeah.
the big format so that I'm taken seriously or whatever the excuse is. My advice to filmmakers who are listening, because obviously I'm going to throw in tags so that filmmakers find this podcast episode.
Sure.
Don't wait don't wait to make your movie. Just make your fucking movie.
Yeah.
And the reason is I waited way too long, and all these great scripts that I can make now I'm no longer interested in. I wish I had
Yeah.
just shot that stuff on mini DV or something.
Because it's kind of like you can never fail, really, if you think about it. Because either it turns out how you want and you get a complete project, or you learn so much from it. Like we had a shoot where I planned it out. Me and my brother had written this script. We're like, okay, it was like, and I used to mix sound for live gigs in this pub, and we sort of, the guy who ran it said, okay, you can stay overnight and like shoot, and we were like, this is a dream come true. So we go to this pub and we spend, I think it was like into the early hours of the morning filming, and then the guys I was shooting with just said, the lights in shot, like the acting isn't feeling right. Let's just quit. And I just wanted to say let's continue, but I realised that even if that film never saw the light of day and never got finished, what we'd learned on that shoot was so much more valuable than having a film to kind of show off. And that's the thing I feel like with any art, with music or that, in the moment it's like, oh, it's such a failure. Like I wanted to make this project, it didn't make it out. But you think, but you get so much that then can transfer to the next project that it's like you never lose with it, really.
Yeah, and that's part of the whole lifelong learning approach that I've adopted later than I should have. When I went back to school in my mid-30s, which wasn't that long ago, it was in 2015, I instantly just like, I learned that phrase, lifelong learning, and kind of instantly applied it. Like everything is taken seriously and everything is directed to be, if not a product, then at least something towards my being as a creator. So it will be out there. But the most important thing, of course, is to learn something to get me to the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing.
And it travels with you, doesn't it, as well?
Absolutely. And I've found too that if I'm going through the motions, because you can make a movie just going through craft motions, but I get bored. If it's so formulaic and I know how it's going to be, I get bored. And there are things that I had that were potential archival projects or restoration projects that I just like, you know what, I'm not interested. They weren't that interesting when I made them, and they're still not interesting because they were too safe. I didn't learn anything. I didn't experiment. Yeah. So I don't know how helpful these stories will be to people, but
I did just have for a few seconds there it glitched. If I went quiet, I heard what you said for the video. Yeah, just in the last bit, but no, it's I think it's such an incredible message to share. I think as well because and I really like what you say about not sticking to the formula of things. I mean, even it's funny because I used to be with filming. I used to be, we're gonna have this set up like this and that. And although I've always, kind of tried to just, go with the flow of things, it was actually when I started to get into acting, I started thinking, okay, how do I do this? And I started, studying, acting teachers and stuff and reading loads of books and things. And you almost are looking for that formula. And I feel you can do this with all areas of art. We're like, okay, well, what does this person do? And you look at someone like a successful actor and you watch, you can find yourself going down the rabbit hole of YouTube trying to find out what's their method, and then you realize that there isn't one because every project just comes with such unique challenges. But like I remember the first thing, like I was acting for a friend, and to try and get to find the character was such a I started off trying to use the formula that I had pictured it would be needed, and then it went completely different way. And then eventually when I found it, I thought, okay, now I've got the formula. And then the next film we did, I thought, okay, well, I've got it because I just do what I did last time. And of course I found that, and obviously this then translated across to all other art forms, but it's kind of realizing that you can't just play it safe, because it doesn't, every project has such unique challenges, but also you almost don't want to, because if it was just a formula, it's almost like, well, why bother? Because it's just, what the outcome's going to be. Yeah. It'd be the same every time. But I think that's a really important message as well about, just not following the formula and being open-minded as well, I think.
Yeah, I see that sometimes with people who spent more time on a professional set than making independent work, where they have this, they're just checking off the boxes.
Yeah.
And then, and I would challenge them. I'd be like, well, why don't we do it this way? It seems more practical and more interesting, and it baffles them that that's even that certain things are a possibility, like the black hole. In Fractals, there's a sentient black hole. You were heavily involved in bringing that to life.
Yeah.
And in a normal production, that would be an After Effects in every shot.
Yeah.
No one in their right mind would make something like that practical. It would also probably be a little cooler the way it looks, right? Whereas I'm just like, you know what? Fuck After Effects. I have access to it, but I don't want to use it. I want to use 20-ounce raw canvas and massive amounts of acrylic black paint. That's going to be our black hole. And if we use After Effects, it's to maybe clean it up for certain things here and there. And there were some people who, I talked to prior to casting this thing who were so weirded out by that concept because it was so against what they would normally see on a film set.
Yeah. I actually was listening to one of your podcasts, and they were talking about how they couldn't put their finger on the genre, because it was it's almost, I think it was talking about, I can't remember which podcast, I think it was with, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, either Avis or Avis,
Avis.
Avis, yeah. It was talking about how it was almost couldn't figure out if it was almost like a cartoon and how to play the character. But, I was thinking about, it made me think about the black hole, and I was thinking, what I really like is it kind of reminds me of a set you would see, like if you went to the theatre and you'd have it all, because there's a craft in it. And I think, and obviously this is having worked in VFX, to say I prefer it not done with VFX obviously is saying something, but I really think having it practical, it just gives it a unique element, and it makes it stylistically clear that it's almost seems bolder, but also I wonder if it made it more interesting to actually for the actors to play off, because so often with VFX you having to, obviously, and that's the whole part, imagination is such a big part of acting, but when you actually have something to interact with in that way, I can imagine it's almost like a sort of theatrical performance on some level, because you kind of have that to enter, to build a relationship with the kind of the actual set around you, which must have been quite nice, I'd imagine.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would assume that from the actor's standpoint that helped enormously. But going back to your thing about how you're an effects person who prefers it this way, this is my philosophy. Producers are going to do what they're going to do, but nobody should really be leaning so heavily on visual effects to present something so important to that story. Yeah, unless you happen to be a guy who owns a visual effects place and you're just looking to sell your services to Hollywood, Star Wars. But I'm not the owner of a visual effects company. I'm not selling my visual effects services because I don't have any. I'm selling Eric Norcross as a genre. That's basically it.
And it's, and I feel like it also goes into the concept. And this is what's so strange, is that just as Fractals, as you approached me with Fractals and said, is this something you'd like to kind of help out with, was just the time where in my life I'd made this decision that instead of, I kind of had this crossroads of, the conflict between art and commerce, where I was kind of like, should I go down sort of an artistic path? And I know you can blend the two, but in a generalized standpoint, do I go down the artistic route where I follow, expression and, things that feel morally and, ethically correct? Or do I go down the route of, there's a lot of money that can be made from art? And obviously being younger and kind of like in that perspective of kind of, everything's kind of new and who am I and all this, it's kind of like, there's a real conflict for a minute. And I think I spoke to you briefly. I during the lockdown, I'd started up a company that with a friend, originally to fund a film, but we kind of we saw the possibilities financially, and we kind of got so, down that rabbit hole that I almost lost sight of the music and the acting and the filmmaking. And then I at one point I just said, look, this isn't what I want to do, and I've got to go back to, to art as opposed to, commerce. And then Fractals, in that month, you approach with Fractals, which is kind of this artistic battle between, Artie wants to be an artist, but also, there's this world that's always there, shouting in his face, saying how important money is and how he needs to make money and how it's not, it's not measured as real success in such a commercial world. And I thought, what are the, it really spoke to me at that point, because I was like, and that's one of the big things as well, taking it on. I was like, this project, feels like something that I actually really can connect to the story and the message behind it. And I'm sure that's something you've encountered a lot, is that battle between art and commerce.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, there's a vibe to Fractals that is not only rooted in sort of the self trying to negotiate, pleasing someone, but also trying to be satisfied with it. But there's also all that employment aspects of it, right?
Yeah, with like the soul
the guy's getting his soul sucked, and that's him applying to jobs, and that's really rooted in. There's a couple things. One, that whole idea of the black hole being the job portal. People will understand once they see the movie. That came from this snarky comment I made a couple of years ago, where I was just, I said to Jan, I just feel like with ZipRecruiter, I'm dumping my soul into a black hole, and it's just eating it, and all this energy is getting put into making it the perfect fucking resume, the perfect representation of me that a resume is possibly capable of. I think resumes are terrible in general. I think that to boil a person down to a piece of paper is the worst thing society has done to us, or one of the worst things. And that was kind of the seed for like this idea of creating a sentient black hole that just. But then there's also the clients I have landed, the employment I have landed, who basically, like, I can't tell you how many job listings I see for video and film people. I just need a guy to produce videos for me. I don't need a filmmaker. I don't need a filmmaker.
Basically, they don't want any personality. They just want robotic video. Yeah.
They just want raw footage that is as I'm not going to say professional as possible, because I think that's a loaded word, but as
like corporate,
soulless as possible. Yeah, corporate, soulless.
Yeah.
And I was just getting so disenchanted by that. And I don't want to be disenchanted. I don't want to feel like I want to be wise, but I don't want to be disenchanted. And that's the other thing too, is I see so many creative people in sort of their midlife area who never achieved what they set out to achieve creatively. Maybe they were a musician, maybe they were a filmmaker, maybe they were a photographer, maybe they painted. And because they kept giving in to all of these employment expectations with it, they never really created the work that got them to the level they wanted to be.
Yeah.
And sometimes it manifests in just quiet desperation. You can tell somebody's unhappy even though they're talented and they're not doing anything with that talent. Sometimes they're really bitter and angry. They might see you filming and might be that person who's calling the police on you. that's a very real possibility that half the people we run into that are bitter about us creating are those people. Not all the time, of course. Some people are just miserable in general. But I do think that a part of the philosophy that I discovered in the making of Fractals is absolutely people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's why they're miserable. And
It's
that's what
true.
Artie in the movie is trying to avoid. He
And it's
doesn't
funny
want to
because
become that.
I feel like it's the hard, the easier thing to do is to just, just give in. I mean, I started looking at stories of people like, Tarantino, Kurt Cobain, like any, just people, from the past who kind of achieved almost what they set out to achieve. And the one thing that I always found in common is that they never ever like caved, because they must have felt, these pressures of, get a job, do all this. And it's funny, listen to the stories. I mean, like Kurt Cobain, I know that he sort of had like odd jobs here and there, like janitor and stuff like this, but he would literally stay at home and just put all that focus and energy. Because I almost have this belief now that you only in your lifetime have so much kind of what can become creative energy. And I feel like you have to really focus it, and the more you're able to channel into that thing that you're passionate about, the further you sort of push that train forward. Because I feel like, and this was the whole thing, when we're doing this sort of company, I'd find myself, and it's not that we're selling anything I disagreed with, because obviously I think I mentioned it was stuff that, like could kind of add film grain to like digital film and stuff like this, or VFX stuff. And it was something which I'd actually used in all this, but I'd find myself writing up a description for it, where it'd be like, why you should buy this or this. And we'd watch these courses on kind of marketing. And I never stopped to think, what am I doing here? Like, what's the actual, like, what's the point of all this? And it was just putting all this energy into kind of trying to get, essentially although it can be blurred and obscured, essentially trying to kind of, get other people's money. And then one day I thought, I don't know. I felt like, all this energy, I thought that the last year, although, financially you can achieve something, all that energy could have been put into a film or an album or a song, and I thought, it's funny how the more you kind of go with what the world tells you to do, the further away you get from what just feels right. And I think you're right. I think people, they oppress that feeling. They say, no, I've got to do this. And obviously, understandably, some people aren't in a situation where it's at all easy to have the freedom to create, obviously, and there's obviously financial pressures. But if you're able to get to a place where they're met and then have that extra energy to put into stuff, I feel like you're right. The people who kind of go down a more kind of, shall we say, like cognitive route, who are artistically minded, it does almost build, I feel. And you do, I've experienced as well people who you can tell they're really bitter about something, and it's usually because they know that it's just a constant reminder of their failure to achieve what they really wanted to achieve in life.
Yeah, this is also like something that you reminded me of when you said the world doesn't want you to do what you're supposed to be doing, or something like that. Paraphrasing you just now. It reminds me of prior to the pandemic, I was directing video for this guy, James Altucher, who is an entrepreneur. He has a podcast for entrepreneurs who are interested in starting businesses and whatnot.
Oh, is that called, what's the podcast called?
The James Altucher Show.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Because
It's just named after him.
I wonder if I've seen that.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically on my resume at this point, and that's about it. I don't really put the clips out there because it's his show. But he would talk about a little bit about how, I mean, I don't know if he remembers talking about it because he talks a lot and he doesn't always remember what he talks about. But he would talk a little bit about how, like, people don't care about what you should be doing or what you want to do for yourself. They just, they want to figure out whether you're useful to them. And if you're not, you're not. And if you are, they try to keep you doing that same thing.
Yeah.
And it's just, whether it's good for you or not. And in one of my favorite quotes from him, and I'm not going to do it justice because I don't really remember quotes word for word, was that this term, I don't know if you have this term over there, but here there's this phrase that is used, especially with young people, called paying your dues. So you got to pay your dues before you can get the thing for you, you know. I guess if you want to make professional films, you got to pay your dues by working as a grunt on a set or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
Pay your dues to get promoted. Paying your dues is a load of shit, and it's the whole concept is designed to get free or cheap labor from young people.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I think we say there's one that we always say, which is paid with experience, is the one that I hear a lot here, which is like, oh, it pays experience, or like, you know, work your way up kind of thing.
I mean, imagine the stuff that neither of us would have created had we focused more on paying our dues. Fractals don't exist. Oh, I gotta go pay my dues now. I gotta go work for somebody who doesn't value creativity. So Fractals won't exist.
Yeah.
And your next, you know, you probably wouldn't have the time to go back into analog recording and experiment with that because you're too busy paying your dues.
It's true. It's a really good point, actually. I mean, I almost feel it always starts with school. I know there is a difference in school in the UK and the US slightly, but I've always found that my experience of school was that if you want to be an employee, or if you want to be, you know, in a, you know, like a high-paying job, you know, like a lawyer, doctor, it's so great. But I felt that if you wanted to be like an artist or an entrepreneur or anything kind of outside of that box, the education that I found that school was providing wasn't there. And it's funny because I pretty much dropped out of what I guess the equivalent is high school there. Here we call it secondary school. And I would just be at home learning After Effects and like doing music. And it was, you know, it wasn't just, oh, I'm not going to go to school. You know, I had stuff going on and kind of, you know, a lot of time couldn't face going in. But it was funny because at the time it was like such a panic, and everyone like, oh, you know, my parents, everyone were like, oh, you know, if you don't go to school, like you're not going to have anything. And it's kind of like, you'll never be able to get a job. You'll never do this. And it was like, and for a minute I believed it, you know, but then now I look back and I think if I'd continued to really care, you know, about, and that's not to discourage people who want to go down that path, of course, but if it's not, I don't think it's the path for everyone, and I think there's not many options if you don't fit into that category. Yeah. It's kind of like you're in the club or you're not, and it's kind of like one of the best things I think I did was to focus on that stuff, because it meant by the time that I was at that age of finishing school, I now had learned all this stuff about filmmaking, all this, and I was able to start, you know, taking these risks and creating, you know, I know that I would have been well into my late 20s before I started taking those risks had I paid more attention like in school, because it would have taken me longer to break free from it. But at the time it seemed like such a, you know, like my whole world will end when I get past school because I just have nothing. Yeah. And it turned out to be a complete lie.
School in general, and this is my pet peeve with the whole cookie cutter system of education. It's designed to turn out workers and not entrepreneurs. And I feel like a lot of people are falling through the cracks because of that. There's a lot of people with a great deal of potential who, if we rooted our whole education and here's how you start a business, here's how you hone a practice, in that, God, so many people would be much more happier because they would have more quickly found what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Instead, the system here is, here's how to get a job. Here's how to type your resume. Here's how to appeal to someone.
How to apply.
Here's how to fit into an office environment. If you don't fit in, you're less likely to be hired because people want you to fit into their culture. And it's just like,
yeah.
I don't want that. I never did. And
it's like how to conform.
Yeah,
like,
how to conform.
On every level.
Wear these really uncomfortable shoes that offer no support whatsoever because we have a dress code. Here's what that dress code looks like.
And it's like, I love there's a quote from, is it Steve Wozniak? The
this is
co-founder
gonna
of Apple. And although obviously there's parts of his, life which are kind of, whatever, there's this one thing really stuck out, which was he said that the problem with school in his mind is that it tells you that if you don't have the same answer as everyone else, you're wrong. But when it comes to creating, you have to have a different answer than everyone else. And I think that summarizes so beautifully for me the idea that, in the test, if you don't all reach it the same way, that's wrong. But when it comes to creating, the whole point is you're supposed to break out of the mold if you really want to,
I mean, that's
so
how
it's true.
That's how we grow. That's how society grows. That's how civilization grows. And this is coming full circle, this conversation, because it goes back to sort of invention and not ticking off what, the craft, or not appealing to the demands of a client because they just want non-creative stuff. And I don't know if you've heard this sort of phrasing before, but I hear this from some business consultants all the time. I know a few business consultants, and they always say, if you were to ask someone at the turn of the century what they needed most, they would have said a faster horse. So then you would have never had the car if you could breed a faster horse. Instead, somebody thought outside the box, said, well, why don't I make an engine, put it inside a chassis, and boom, we have a new invention. It's better than a horse. It's not likely to die as soon as a horse will die, or get exhausted as soon as a horse will get exhausted.
Yeah.
So then, not 100 years later, but maybe 75 years later, what do you need most? I need better fuel consumption. Are you sure you don't want an electric car?
Yeah.
It's
true. It's funny. And it is that thing of full circle. I feel like you can look at any area in life and apply the same logic of and that's I think that's the thing, is that I do wonder what the world would be like if it was the other way around, where everyone was encouraged to kind of think outside the box. If that had become the new box, I don't know. But
yeah.
I mean, even there was this thing I saw Kanye West actually was talking about, which was why boxes? He was saying it's so interesting because we're born in a hospital, and then we're put into a crib, and then we're put into a house, then we're put into an office, then we're put into a coffin. And it's kind of we just live a life of squares and boxes, where metaphorically and literally we're just living our life in these boxes, where everything like a hamster on a wheel.
That is the most English thing I've heard come out of your mouth.
And it's that's the thing. And I feel like that's again, going back to fractals, that was one of the kind of the big appeals, because before I did fractals, one of the last VFX jobs I did was it was like a game, interactive game that became a movie, and it had it was a big budget, not big budget, but it had a fair budget, and it had actors from Star Wars and Peaky Blinders and stuff in it. And they basically, what had happened is they'd run out of budget, so they'd gone on Fiverr looking, to try and, cut, because they'd already overstretched the budget. Can we find someone that will, do the last additional visual effects, with a, without charging too much? And obviously they came across me, and I ended up doing this job. And I think it was one of those jobs where it's kind of the pay isn't really, for what it is, the pay is pretty poor, but it's a good experience. And, I'll put it on my reel and all that. And the experience of working in that way of here's the in and out folder, and the way it was with how, and obviously I can't go into too many details and all that, but it was one of those ones where everything was so organized as a project, and I was, you feel just like not a person, you just feel like a tool of someone else that just says do this, do that, and it was just it felt so dehumanizing. And that's not to say that I wasn't grateful for that project, but I meant, and some people, I think could enjoy working that way, but for me, having not worked in that way before, it wasn't specific to this project, but just the way that the visual effects industry can work on a bigger scale, it really made me think, oh, this isn't what I want to do. But it's interesting. When I studied music production, we had marketing lectures about music marketing. They were telling us about marketers market to people depending on which side of the brain they use most. Apparently, it's like left and right side, and apparently they put it into two different categories. I think it's cognitive and affective or something. And it's where if you're cognitive, let's say you were selling someone a camera, if you were cognitive, they'd say, this camera has this many, this resolution, it has this input, and they tell you all the information, all the data. And if you're effective, they sell you on feeling as opposed to information. So they'd say, with this camera, you can create this, you can get this. And it's funny because you can kind of look at any advert nowadays, or commercial it would be, and you can like work out who they're going for. Because like if it's like a gaming PC, it'll be for a more cognitive audience. So they'll have like, these are the specs. But then if it's like a can of Coke, they might get more effective. How does it make you feel? What's the experience? And I feel like jobs are also the same. Like there's certain people who like working in that way of, I need it all ticked off. I need to know all the data. I need it like that. I need the statistics. And then there's people who say, just give me the kind of vibe of it, just give me the feeling, and, they sort of flow. And that's not to say that one is better than the other, because I think you need both. But I think it's an interesting thing to observe.
Yeah,
of kind of the difference.
Yeah, I'm thinking now about like this client I had. He was very much going down the checklist kind of guy, and his expectation of any story and all that. And he hired me to edit this video for a tour bus company. I'm sure you've seen in cities we have tour buses that take tourists around.
Kind of
and it
loop
was
around.
a video that was meant to loop in the lobby of their building, and I edited it for him. Told the story of New York City really nicely. Went from point A to point B to point C. When you're in New York City, the story is Broadway. So I went from Grand Central to Times Square, all the way down Broadway, all the way to Battery Park where you can see the Statue of Liberty, and then back up again. It's a great story. It's this history of New York. He comes back at me the day I won my first film festival award.
Yeah.
An award for storytelling, essentially. Any film festival award is an award for storytelling. He's like, this sucks. You have no semblance of story. You have no idea of story structure. I'm like, I was just so baffled. He owes me $1,000 for that job. And I think that he might have just been trying to skeeve out of that job. But he is an example of somebody who just, he's working this corporate position, going down this checklist of things. And because his idea of what the story of that bus ride should be didn't coincide with what I thought was a really wonderful interpretation for this video. I had no direction whatsoever. He just said, edit this thing so it can play in a loop. I'm like, all right. Any film student would probably just throw all that footage together in any random order and call it a day. At least the ones I went to school with. I actually put thought into this. All right, you're coming into Grand Central. You're going to go over to Times Square first. Or you're going to hit the library. Then you're going to go to Times Square. Then you're going to go down Broadway. And as you go down Broadway, you'll see the Empire State Building. You'll see Madison Square Garden. You'll see the Flatiron District. So on and so forth. I put thought into that. That's story. That's the story of New York.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, the first street in New York was Broadway. And the reason it is because it kind of goes alongside the Hudson River from the Battery all the way to Albany, New York, and upstate New York State. Like, I put thought into this fucking thing. And to be told that by this checkmark making administrative asshole on the same day that I won my first film festival award says everything I need to know about these types of people.
It speaks.
I can't negotiate it. Like, I can't negotiate it professionally in my brain and being like, okay, this is like, I just get infuriated. It's not even about the money or the fact that he still owes me $1,000. Like, it's just like, how do people not think this way? And I do think, once again, we're coming full circle. Education all comes down to education. Sorry, I interrupted you a little bit there, but
No, no,
I
no,
was
not
on a
at all.
fucking roll.
I could tell you were like, like riffing, and I was like, I got to let this play out because I don't want to just jump in prematurely. But I had the same because obviously I decided to use Fiverr, didn't I? Because and that's I think what we met through initially.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna name it because I wasn't gonna try to promote it because I didn't like how much money they were taking from you.
Yeah,
They were like taking money from me and you.
It was 20% they were taking from
That's
my
gross.
end, which is like a lot.
Yeah,
And obviously they to be fair, I mean we met through it, and like I've met other collaborators through it, but I got really into just doing muzzle flash effects. I don't know why. It was just a weird obsession where I just spent years doing muzzle flashes.
that was the effect I hired you for.
Yeah, and so I thought, okay, I'll do. And it was crazy. I put up. No one had a job on there for muzzle flashes, and so I put up muzzle flashes. Within 2 days, there's like 5 other people doing it. So but it basically got picked by Fiverr's staff because no one else was doing that in visual effects category, and as a result, I got loads of like short film. Because it's such an in demand when you start filmmaking. One of the big things I think is running around with like airsoft guns, and so I get loads of like requests for this, and that's actually how I got the big interactive game. Was actually obviously, like I say, I talked about earlier on Fiverr, but the only reason I did it was because it suited. At that point in time, I didn't want to be full-time employment, but on there you can accept or deny. So I'd sort of sit there and say, okay, we've got these, these job requests, and I could kind of, work when I needed to. But yeah, obviously in the end, I thought like that, especially if it's like a bit, a job where it's like hours and hours, and like 20% to me just seemed a bit like 10%. I'd be like, okay, but like 20, I was like, that's like just a bit
and it's gonna. I guarantee you. I'm glad we tapered off that platform and that we're just negotiating behind the scenes. But like, it's gonna get worse for people on there because if there's one thing I've learned about a lot of these apps and social media websites and whatnot, they always end up kicking their users to the curb, and we're seeing that now with OnlyFans. I think that's the name of it. Where they built their brand off sex workers, and now that they're raising outside funds, they've kicked all the sex workers to the curb and are just promoting their celebrities that are on there. And it's just like, fucking YouTube did that too. Like they built their platform off independent filmmakers. I was one of the first indie filmmakers up there, and I can safely say that I had the first indie film trailer on YouTube the year it was founded.
I remember seeing this.
Yeah, nobody thought to do that. They were just putting up their home movies. I'm like, I'm going to put my trailer up. And we went viral. Like, we were the first indie film trailer on there to go viral. And I was a YouTube partner for a number of years. And then at a certain point, they're like, you know what? We don't want to pay the lower performing people, even though we're going to run ads on them. So they did the cap at like 100,000 subscribers. And then Amazon did it a few years after that. I actually made money off some of my short films through Amazon until the bean counters retooled how they pay people because they wanted to be able to pay celebrities more. Yeah. And all the people that built that platform, the no budget independent filmmakers, got kicked to the curb. And Fiverr is going to do the same thing. So if you think 20% is a lot, it's going to get worse.
Yes, it all feeds in as well to the whole sort of social media age. I mean, I remember the year that Facebook became popular kind of around where we lived, and it was about 2010. And this is probably not good, but I was being 10 years old at the time. I was like, I got to get Facebook. And I remember in those days, and obviously you'll remember, like Facebook was, you literally see the post in order of what's been posted recently. So you like go on Facebook and you see everything, but it's like, of all your friends, what's most recent? So you'd have 10 minutes ago, an hour ago, and then you'd have like maybe an ad on the side. Yeah. And then the rise of these algorithms. I mean, me and like so many people I know, literally, I have accounts for promoting work, like as in like, if there's a song or something like that, I have accounts. But I use the Facebook business app to make posts just because I don't want my brain hijacked by Instagram, because I just remember a turning point in like 2013 where suddenly it's like, we're going to show you infinitely like you know, we're now going to start showing you exactly what we think you want to see and learning. And that, I think, is so scary. I think it was even one of the documentaries that came out last year, either The Social Dilemma or one of those, and they said a great thing about how, technology should be like a tool and like a bike, where you go to it when you need it and then you can use it as a tool. But when it's like so evasive that it's trying to constantly pull you in and take your time, and obviously time translating to money or data or whatever it is, it becomes something else. And it's like, even like a camera, right? Like a phone versus a camera. A camera's like, okay, I need to make a movie. I'm going to pick up the tool. I'm going to, use it for the purpose I want, put the tool back down. But like over phone, it's like so, we're so sort of cybernetic, but it's just not like implants yet. It's just, we hold it in our hand.
Yeah.
But it's crazy time. And YouTube obviously being the same, because I remember YouTube when it was like that, and now it's something very, very different.
And it's hard for me to tell that story too, because I still really believe in YouTube.
Me too,
I mean, we're going to put this fucking thing on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I believe that it is probably the best social media platform out there right now. But yeah, that whole thing with Facebook filtering out your friends' posts to replace them with ads, that kind of shit just gets under my skin. I can't negotiate what's going through people's minds when they think that that's a good idea. That's so bad for society and for people.
Yeah, and it makes you, you just put out a few posts that a certain friend doesn't like, and then they never see anything from you again. Or even like, I remember like when we started our band page in like 2014 or something, we'd put out a post and the people who liked the page would see it. And it didn't say, oh, you want it to be seen by the people who like it, you're going to have to pay to boost the post. But it's, I remember at one point, like people like accounts like Justin Bieber and that, I would say them, but it's probably their teams running it, where they literally would make their accounts a personal account. Because the moment you make an Instagram, or at least it used to be this way, the moment you would make a personal account into a business account or a creator account, it suddenly would lower your reach, because they know that, okay, now you're doing something that you might be able to pay to promote. And so I remember a period where all these like celebrity accounts were made personal accounts because they knew it would reach more people.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be that way, in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah, my Instagram is actually an official artist business account, but
yeah,
I have nothing to promote like through that. Like everybody I'm trying to reach through that tends to end up acknowledging my posts.
Yeah.
And if they stop, then I'll assume the platform's dead, and then I won't use it.
Exactly. But I feel like there was almost a sort of backtrack, because I remember about 2018 or just after. I mean, Instagram's changed a lot, but I remember a point where it started to go, so the reach started to really go down on sort of business accounts, at least in my experience. And then it almost in recent years, in the last sort of 2 years, when they added a lot more options for like creator accounts, it seems to now be a lot fairer in it. But like when we were doing, the kind of business thing, we started looking into like running Facebook ads and stuff. And then seeing the back end of that platform and how precise you can target a product to people. It was one of those things where it's kind of like, at first it's like, hey, that's cool, right? You can like, if someone wants this product, you can match them specifically. But then I thought, the more I thought on it, I was like, hang on, wait, there's something about that doesn't sit right. The idea that most people using it aren't aware, and obviously now it's becoming more well known, but aren't aware that it's that saying, isn't it, that if the product's free, you're usually the product.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. If they're not selling it to you, they're selling something on your back to someone else. So
yeah, it's true.
Absolutely,
it's crazy.
Yeah, you've been occasionally freezing, but I can still hear you. Like your audio feed's been perfect and consistent, but sometimes your video freezes.
It's really strange. I find this, I don't know if it's because of I wouldn't think it'd make a difference, but it's really weird because, I'm in the room with like the internet and it seems to be a good connection, but I found last time, I wonder if it's something to do with the distance between us. But I think because it's the internet, it probably wouldn't make a difference, but.
Yeah, I don't know. I know the infrastructure in my New York neighborhood is absolute shit. We're in one of the few neighborhoods in New York City that still has above ground lines.
Yeah.
So they're always getting toppled over, and we got a storm coming in. So it could be on this end.
And that's the other exciting thing, isn't it? The idea. I mean, I'm hoping to. I've been to New York once. I think I said in the other call, but I was a lot younger, and we have a plan where a big group of us, my brother and some friends, we're going to go to New York for, and this will depend on COVID and how everything goes, obviously, but probably next year come to New York for a few weeks, but then we're going to go on to LA for a couple of months. Hopefully, obviously, it depends on how long we're able to stay without work visas and stuff, but. There's something about, it's funny, something about New York that's always just been so charming to me. And I remember going there, like I slept. It's odd because it's such a loud city, like the closer you get, but I slept better than I've ever slept. Because there's just something about knowing that like there's always like some kind of something going on that I just really connected with. But I really love, again, I don't know how, I'm sure you've seen, is it Birdman, the one with Michael Keaton, and there's something about that just really gives me that feeling that I had when I went to New York of just kind of like just the history of it. But it must be such an interesting place to be a filmmaker, like living in New York, because there's so much history of film and so much history of performance there. That must be such a such a luxury.
Yeah, every art form is here.
Yeah.
And film started just across the river in New Jersey, the first film studio, the film industry in general. But you said something very interesting, and I don't hear it a lot, but it is absolutely true. It's so easy to sleep here. And that's
really
contrary to how it's often portrayed. Like you'll see these movies that, I'm going to New York for the first time, and then they can't sleep because some neighbors
the pillow wrapped over the head.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's just not true. Like I like 2 weekends ago, Jan and I went up to the Hudson River Valley and slept among nature. We were in a house, but you could hear all this noise that, like the locusts, or I don't know if they're locusts, but there's some sort of bug and bird combo that just created this really horrible noise. I'm going to put it on free sound because I recorded some of it. And then you can hear it. And just like, how do people sleep in the countryside with all this shit going on? And it's just like, this is literally what it sounds like. I got to step back from my mic. All fucking night. And I'm just like, I got to go back to the city. I would rather have sirens.
And the honking, yeah. I remember when we stayed, we started off in the city and then we went up to Catskills, up in the mountains. And the transition, and it's even more notable, I feel like, in New York. I just remember going from sleeping really well to just suddenly, like you say, it's just...
Yeah, we were in
and it's almost like, I don't know, I guess it's because it's like you hear humans and it's kind of like there's something, not always, but in that case, I found it almost comforting. But it's almost like, I feel like it's like someone telling you a bedtime story in a weird way. Because it's like, there's someone, it's not like the world's stopping. But it's weird because, I mean, I live just outside of London, but I live in a city, or just on the outskirts of a smaller city. And so it's not like, I mean, it's not New York level loud, but it's like, or London even, but it's, when I fall asleep, you can hear traffic and you can hear it's not like, dead quiet, but it's weird, because we're going away, say this on a Monday, as of when we're recording this, but that's going to be a weird adjustment. I just know it, because you think, peace, it'll be peace and quiet, but sometimes your brain's so used to it, it's actually so much louder when it's quieter in a weird way. But I know exactly what you mean.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Catskills too, because that's where we were. We were in the foothills of the Catskill Mountains.
Right, yeah.
So it's like the same fucking area.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, I haven't slept a night in Maine, my home state of Maine, in a few years, but when I would go back to Maine after having lived in New York, there were sounds that I never even like thought about that now kind of freak me out. Like, I don't know if you ever heard a fox like bark, but it's like it's like this horrific scream. It's like, "Kay! Kay!" And it's just all night they're doing that, and I never thought about it growing up, but I couldn't sleep in Maine anymore because of that.
We get them here. We get foxes like on the road, just on the road, and we keep chickens, and the fox is always after them. But like it'll be like 2 a.m, and suddenly it starts screaming, and my girlfriend will be like, "What is that? What is that?" It's like, do we call the police if someone's screaming? It's like, no, it's just the foxes. But I've always found it so fascinating, the perception between people from the US and people from the UK. Like one thing I find really weird is like there's almost like I was listening to a podcast about it the other day. It's almost like the second British invasion. I feel like so many actors or like filmmakers like in American films are British, and I still don't fully understand like why, because there's so many things where like the lead actor is always British doing an American accent.
We're trying to figure that out too.
Because that's the thing.
Because there's a lot of talent here.
Yeah, really. I mean, it's funny. Some of my favorite actors are American, and that's.
Yeah, it baffles me. I honestly don't know what it is. I mean, it could just be nepotistic bullshit, but I honestly don't know. Like, because I see that too. I see so many parts where I'm just like, why this dude? Why is this guy playing? What was it? Daniel Craig playing a guy from the South. He's done it like 2 or 3 times now.
Yeah. It's on Knives Out.
Really need to do that. Yeah, Knives Out. I mean, he was great in it. But
but
there's 1,000 other actors who could also be great in it that actually do that accent genuinely.
Yeah.
And
I found that's
weird.
I heard a theory which was about. Because obviously the UK, everything being so much closer together. I mean, this is the thing that's so crazy about like going to the US is the scale is just mad. It's crazy because like here, like it's you can drive, up to just around or up to Scotland or wherever. It's you can cover the ground, like be from one extreme to the other just with a sort of short drive. But obviously in the US, everything is so far apart. And there's a thing that they say is that. The difference in British accents supposedly, and this is me quoting, by the way, this isn't my personal theory, but apparently something to do with the difference in British accents. So from like up north, like Liverpool, Manchester, to then like London is so different and so extreme. They say that for a British actor to try and reach those accents is somehow training or something. I think this was a theory from, I think it was Charlie Hunnam, the one who played Jax Teller in Sons of Anarchy. And he was talking about how because there was such a difference between accents and British actors kind of are expected to do that, it's much easier to do the transition from British to American accent. And there's always this thing of, they say that American actors can't do the British accent as well. It's weird. What's weird about that is I've heard to be fair, some American British accents straight away, but there are some that are crazy, like Elijah Wood in Lord of the Rings, for example. I had no idea. Like there are some that just completely floor me, but I'm sure it must be the same, because this is what's weird is I can't see when a British actor's doing a terrible American accent, because obviously I only know from films, but a lot of the time that's British people doing impersonations anyway, because at the moment it seems to be flooded with that.
Some of them hide it well, where like if I didn't know they were British, I'm usually just like, whoa. And I know that has happened where like there are people who, like the guy who played Dr. House, for example.
Oh, Hugh Laurie, yeah.
Hugh Laurie. I had no idea he was British because I only know him from House. And so when I saw him on a late night show with Craig Kilborn, or one of those guys, it was like, holy shit. And the story I heard about him was that when he sent his audition tape, one of the producers was like, that's what we need, a good old American guy. And it's just like, But then there's stuff like the Daniel Craig thing where it sounds cartoonish to me.
Yeah, yeah. See, it sounds the same here.
But at the same time, he's putting on a southern drawl.
Yeah,
And the
this kind
southern
of
drawl also is cartoony in and of itself. Like it's
yeah.
just,
So
I
it's
can't
like
hear it and then respect the person talking.
it's funny because that's the one which everyone like, well, at school or wherever, if you're kind of doing an American accent, like in my experience, the one that everyone kind of does as the kind of the most approachable seems to be that kind of southern growl, and then it's kind of the over the top California, accent, and then it's kind of then it gets more subtle, and then that's when I find that you get the good performances. But what's crazy about House is, and I actually have a funny story because once my mum nearly like ran over Hugh Laurie with a bike, but he and Stephen Fry, they had a comedy show, a bit of Fry and Laurie, and he was in a lot of sort of British comedy stuff. And it's crazy because, and I obviously can't speak for everyone, but me and my friend's perception of Hugh Laurie was, we just know him as like this British sort of comic actor, a bit like Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean, where it's kind of just like this sort of small kind of local feeling. And it's funny because House is almost seen, or at least was in our sort of circle, as just kind of a secondary project he did, where it's just kind of like, he did that as well in the US, but he's like from Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie. But it's so weird to think that, like, in how some people see House and they're like, I don't know who this guy is, because it's, and again, obviously, I'm sure there's people in the UK who have had the same, but yeah, no, it was like probably the 80s, I think, but my mum was like cycling through London. He was like crossing over to a theatre because he was in this play. And she just like basically I think either she went too fast or he crossed too fast and then like nearly knocked him down. And then she's like, I'm sorry. And then he was like, it's okay. And she realised it was Hugh Laurie. And she was like, oh no. So thank goodness she didn't, because then obviously House. But I need to watch that still. House, I haven't seen that.
It's the first few seasons are pretty good. You can tell the first season had a really low budget and a really like the camera footage. You can tell is just like it was overly graded and not meant to be color graded. Like it was just like low resolution, high definition video. I know, it almost looked like a prosumer grade video, but it was interesting to see like a mainstream TV show like looking that way. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like I always look at like footage and what I don't know if you remember like when HD was, you could record HD footage on mini DV tape with certain cameras. It looked kind of like that, but where they just threw all this color grade at it and it didn't do it justice. So some of it looks a little muddy, and it's just interesting to watch, like as from an aesthetic standpoint.
It's a weird era as well, because it's where I felt TV started to become arguably a more important artistic. No, I don't mean like more important, but it almost started to overtake film in a way. Because film, I feel like in the late 2000s, I feel like film just became so much more franchised, and obviously there's been some great films and continue to be, especially recently. But I felt like there was the point where television just got really, really good. And I don't know if it was...
I credit that to Lost.
Do you reckon that was the thing?
I think Lost was the one that put television as like this medium has the potential to take over film in terms of its serious ability to tell.
Ability, sure.
Yeah.
No, I remember everyone talking about that, and I feel like for me, it was Breaking Bad. I felt like that was like, okay, you can do that with television. Okay. Just set a new standard. And that's just crazy. I mean,
I honestly don't think Breaking Bad would have been possible without, the early years of HBO, the 90s, going into Lost. I mean, Breaking Bad was a massive risk. You had this high school chemistry teacher becoming a meth kingpin over the course of 6 seasons.
Yeah.
How fabulous is that? Like, I'd greenlight it, but I'm also not a good business person and I don't work in the media. So it's just like to have somebody with the gonads to say, okay, I'd watch that,
Yeah. And I remember I was reading Bryan Cranston's book and talking about like how precise they were about it as well. Like he said, like they'd suggest, maybe he should kill this person. And the writers apparently they'd be like, no, it's too soon, because obviously it had to be such a perfect formula of getting the audience to really, really connect with this character, that to the point where when he starts to break bad, people start to like really question their morals. I think that's what's so interesting. Yeah. It's like, how long can the audience stay with him and justify his actions before you say, okay, that's like a step. And I've it's different from like I talk to friends about it, and some of them are like, oh, as soon as he did this, I was out. And obviously I'm not going to spoil it, but like I've had friends who, yeah.
I mean, I've watched that show from beginning to end twice, with a few episodes I'd revisit occasionally. And honestly, like with all the bullshit he put his family through, all the shit he put Jesse through, as soon as he killed all those guys at the end and died with a smile on his face in the environment that he loves the most, the lab, I was satisfied for him. I'm like, good for you. Like
it's like
that's the story. That's the storytelling, and that's the brilliance of the people who made it. Is they really they didn't follow the formula that most people would follow. Is they made me appreciate this guy's goals and fulfilling what he was missing in life so much that with all the bad shit he did to other people who didn't deserve it, I still rooted for him to get what he wanted.
Yeah, it's weird because you take a step back and you think, if you had heard about his story in the news as a real story, you'd be sick and you'd be like, this guy did what? And then you think, but that's what's so interesting about subjective versus objective reality. But I mean, I'm not ashamed to say I've probably watched, I think, the whole way through Breaking Bad about 6 times, because I just, every time, and the crazy thing is every time I watch it, it gets better. Yeah. It's one of those ones for me. But yeah, no, I feel like nowadays there's such a, I mean, me and my girlfriend went yesterday to see a film, Hugh Jackman, it's called Reminiscence or something, and it's about like, it's just come out, it's just come out here. I think it came out in the US last year, but I guess it probably didn't fully come out. But it's funny because it almost looked like it was, some of the films recently we've seen, they almost look like television. And then we're watching some like the Peaky Blinders latest series, and some of the television looks like cinema, and there's such a weird blurred line now where it's almost like Stranger Things, I think, was a great example where that is shot like some really high budget like 80s movie, but in like episodes. But then like films now, it's like there's this weird crossover happening right now, I think.
Yeah, I consider some of those Netflix shows films. They're just not being presented in the same medium. And that's kind of how I'm writing my own series now, is I'm thinking of them as films, but with limited episodes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually a great example of taking something that exists and reinventing it and retooling how people interpret it. And there's a lot of little things they did with Stranger Things to kind of make it seem different from the other. Like, I recently did a process video for Fractals about the 2-to-1 aspect ratio. I don't know if you caught that on YouTube.
I haven't watched that yet, but I did see it.
So they put their movie in a 2-to-1 aspect ratio, which is it's becoming more common, but it's really not that common yet. And so when something is presented in 2-to-1, already it stands out and looks a little bit more special and looks a little, all right, this is different. This is an event that I'm going to experience differently than everything else. There's just something about it. It's a super weird aspect ratio because it's not quite widescreen. It's not quite 16:9. It's not a square, but it's also kind of an even aspect ratio. It's 2-to-1. It makes a lot of sense and that very subtle decision is having a bigger effect on viewers than I think people are giving it credit for.
It's true, actually. I never thought about that. That's really clicked as you said that. I've just suddenly thought, because it almost gives it that, not stereotypical, but just that cinematic feel. There's certain attributes to that kind of cinematic look that I feel like most people watching wouldn't be able to like put their finger on, but when it's missing, you somehow register that it's missing.
Yeah,
and I feel like that's one of them.
It's not quite a movie, but it's also not quite TV. It's weird. It's this weird upside down that we're in right now.
It's true. And also, it all fits in because that's also, I think, a great example of at least from my perception, are really someone who is English doing an American accent that I had no idea. Which is, Jonathan, I think it is, the one who goes out with Nancy.
I don't know the characters that well.
Sure. There's this, one of the main characters in it is a British actor, and I had absolutely no clue. But it's not like over the top. But that I love also the fact that although you have obviously, some big names in the cast, it's not like big. And the same with Breaking Bad. What I love about some of these TV shows is although like Bryan Cranston had worked in stuff previously, it's almost like it's part of the beauty is that it's like their defining role, like this is their chance. And I feel like they almost, I don't know if this is true, but I always thought Breaking Bad, both Aaron Paul and Bryan Cranston have been trying their whole careers to just have that breakthrough role. And because they kind of both knew it was it, I wonder if that meant they just gave it, everything. And that was part of why that performance was just so incredible.
Well, hopefully we can ask them at some point. I wouldn't mind talking to them on here, because I am curious about that, because for so many in my generation, he was the dad in Malcolm in the Middle.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And that to me, all right, that's the guy. I didn't know his name was Bryan Cranston. He was just Malcolm's dad, and he was weird.
Yeah.
Weird as balls. And then this thing. And for a while, I didn't put the two together. They were completely different people.
Yeah.
And now Breaking Bad is Bryan Cranston. Bryan Cranston is Breaking Bad, just as Aaron Paul is Breaking Bad. Whatever Aaron Paul does, he's always Breaking Bad.
Yeah, it's like
that to me, and it could be bad. Like it could be a terrible show, and that's a bad thing. But in this case, it's a great thing for both of them.
Yeah, it's almost like one of those things where it's like typecasting as well, where it's like, it's like it's one of those roles where once you've done that, that's just always what you remember for. Like we saw Your Honor recently, the one Bryan Cranston did, or like Sneaky Pete that he was in, which I know he produced as well. And I just can't unsee him as Walter White now. And so that must be a real frustration for them though as well, because I think the only exception of Aaron Paul is BoJack Horseman, where he's where he's Todd. That's the only role where I forget it's Aaron Paul. But obviously he's not visually in it. But that must be tough because I'm sure they'd want to like have another role where they're seen as the character, but it's almost like very hard to break free of that shackle of just being seen as the guy from Breaking Bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that really comes down to, one, their ability to negotiate opportunities.
Yeah.
And to learn how to say no, even when money's involved.
Yeah.
And also surrounding themselves with good representatives, agents, managers, whatnot. I mean, if your agent or manager is saying, take this role, it pays a lot of money, I know it's the same thing. First of all, most of these guys, and I know this isn't going to land me an agent by saying this, they're leeches. They want you to make as much money as possible so that they can get their 20% or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And when you see people falling into the same role again and again and again because they did it once really well, it's usually that. So it's really going to be up to people to surround themselves with people who respect their talent and their wishes to diversify, but then also push them to. But wouldn't it be great to have an agent who said, you already did this role, why don't you try this? I think that we have a shot at branching out. Like, I don't ever hear that story, an agent saying that.
It's so true, actually. That's like another thing I never really put much thought to is the idea, because. And I've seen a lot of interviews of actors where they'll say, as soon as they have a big role, that's all that comes in. Or that's all the scripts that come across their desk are just the same character. And I think one person who there are examples, I think, of people who've really made bold choices to step out of that. Like I think a great one is Robert Pattinson, for example, where he, did Twilight or Harry Potter. And it's kind of like they're the same sort of area of role. And it's kind of, you would expect then that his whole career would kind of follow that kind of mainstream movie of that style. And then I know that he
was in Harry Potter?
Yeah, he was in, that was his first kind of acting role. He was in one of the, it's one of the ones in the middle.
I had no idea.
Do you know the bit with the maze where there's I think it's the Goblet of Fire, and they're basically, they're chasing for this maze, and that one of the guys dies in the maze.
That's him?
Spoiler alert, that's him. Yeah.
We don't do spoilers. We watch movies because we like the art and craft. And also, if you haven't seen Harry Potter by now,
yeah, it's like old news at this point. But he was, because he thought, oh, I'm going to get, typecast. And he said like a lot of the scripts that came through were the same. And he basically took it into his own hands. Apparently, he went to festivals and he basically just sought out filmmakers that he really liked. So he found like the Safdie brothers who'd done one film in a festival, and he literally said, let's write a film basically for him. So they basically wrote this movie, what was it, Good Time, great film, just around him.
Did you see Cosmopolis?
I didn't.
That's a good
Cosmopolis.
One. That to me is,
I think I've heard the name, but I'm not sure what that
he's
one is.
in that, and it's set over the course of one night for the most part. That's a movie he did, and that's what got me really respecting the hell out of him as an actor.
Sure.
Because Cosmopolis was the first book I read after I moved to New York City. It's a very New York book. Mm-hmm. And it was a book where I'm like, oh, I could totally see this in a movie with the right person. And then they did it. Many years later, Robert Pattinson's on the scene and he does it. And it's such a good movie.
I've got to watch it. I'd really like to watch that, actually.
And also read the book first, because there's not a lot of books that are well interpreted as films. And I thought that they did such a beautiful job taking that book and making it into a movie. Yeah,
I'll check that out. I think I did, because there was a podcast I watched with, and he was talking on it actually, and I think he was saying that, now that you say it, I think it comes to mind. I do remember him chatting about how that was the thing that initially kind of broke him away from those characters. And obviously, like, I know he's doing this Batman now, which is going to be very interesting to see how that is. That could go one or two ways, I feel like.
Has that resumed filming, do you know?
Well, he had apparently got COVID twice or something. I think they're filming it again. I know they've got the Penguin, is it Paul Dano or Dano, I think.
Oh, Dano, yeah. I don't.
Well,
Paul Dano.
Yeah, the one from Prisoners and There Will Be Blood and all that. Like, he's a director as well now, I think. But it looks like an interesting cast. I'm excited for that. But there's so many superhero films that it's kind of like.
The cool thing about this, though, and I think this is true for the Joker as well, is I appreciate that they don't just have a cinematic universe where you have to conform it. With the Joker and with this, it looks like they can just be a little bit different, a little bit of a different take.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that, actually.
I feel like DC, I feel like because of The Dark Knight, the DC kind of has that reputation of, oh, you can do something really cool and cinematically break, new ground. But, Joker I thought was really cool example. But I did also feel that Joker was kind of king of comedy, Taxi Driver, kind of just like paying respects to like the old, 70s Scorsese.
I saw that as well, and I 100% agree. And like Taxi Driver and the King of Comedy, I can't watch Joker a second time. All three of those films are one-time watches for me.
I see that with the King of Comedy. I think Taxi Driver for me, I can only watch it if like a long time has passed and I'm in a different frame of mind. I'm like, oh, I'd like to see it with this, but I know what you mean. It's one of those films where it's like. And Taxi Driver is quite heavy, especially like the bits with Jodie Foster. It's like, that's some heavy stuff. Yeah, no. I agree. I think that's one thing I haven't really seen a good Marvel film that's really,
inventive.
And like taking risks like that. So I think it's good DC are allowing, this, like Joker and that to be made. Because also it introduces it to new audiences. Because I think people of younger generations, if they haven't seen a lot of that 70s film, I mean, I remember Joker, people my age was just like, people were like going crazy about it. And a lot of them hadn't seen, they hadn't had the opportunity to see some of that, that great cinema of the 70s. And so it was kind of like an entry point for them. And it had De Niro in as well, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, the 70s too, like that's a whole other podcast, 70s cinema and how kind of the vibe of America was represented in the grit of 70s cinema.
Yeah.
And so many people today don't know that that's what they're honoring.
Yeah, and I saw a really great clip about it, talking about how now, because US films are so aimed at international audiences, and obviously they have to land in China and stuff like that, and in most of Europe, it means that there aren't really like defining American films anymore. I feel like they kind of, I mean, there are, but not on like the biggest scale. Like I was thinking about this with British films. It's crazy because so many British directors are trying to make American movies. Like we saw the other day, I think it was Guy Ritchie's The Gentleman with Matthew McConaughey and like people like that, and Hugh Grant. And it's crazy because it's such a sort of British film, and it's so rare to see that now because I feel like so often everyone's trying to go for the biggest audience possible. They kind of lose the identity. And there is, you're right. I mean, I watch those old films, the 70s. I think I really get a sense of like America from this. But now it, you know, certain films on a bigger scale, it feels like it's just trying to, you know, be as global and kind of internationally, you know, acceptable as possible.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Guy Ritchie, because he's a great example of kind of this guy, to me at least, from where I sit, who's creating these great movies with a very specific vibe nobody was doing.
Yeah.
I mean, the first movie I ever waited up all night to see the first screening for was Snatch. When that came out, I was in film school in Vancouver. I waited outside the movie theater for the first showing that morning. And people thought I was crazy because there was no lines for it. But I'm like, this movie looks like one of the most original things I've ever seen in my life. I have to see this first. And then after he started getting these directing gigs, it seems like that's what happened to the film industry. So I'm paralleling it with the 70s because the 70s were these auteurs, these American auteurs that were creating movies on relatively low budgets. They were very unique. They were very personal. They were very much showing what America felt like at that time. From these gritty cop movies like The French Connection.
Yeah.
And the same guy ended up doing The Exorcist, right? Mm-hmm. There's a vibe to those movies. And then once we transition into the 80s and things get cleaner and polished, and then by the end of the 80s, it's super colorful. And then in the early 90s, it's not only colorful, but all the movie scores are super happy and you know, and it's just, that's to me, like there's a parallel between that and what happens when you get all these directing offers. You just transition away from sort of that like there's nothing Guy Ritchie's doing now that I feel like has that same auteur feel. Like,
have you seen the
movies,
The Gentleman?
Like movies?
Yeah.
I think Jan might have seen that
because I felt like
things more. Yeah.
Because Snatch, I felt like, because I agree. I mean, yeah, Snatch. Then he sort of did Sherlock Holmes films, which felt a bit more, And then, but then the thing is, so I kind of had lost a bit of interest, and then I saw The Gentleman. And for me personally, it really clicked and had everything Snatch had. And I actually kind of prefer it, which is saying something, because I really enjoyed Snatch.
Well, I'll definitely check it out. Because once somebody looks like that, they're conforming, they fall off my radar. But since you're recommending it, I'll check it out.
It is completely different than anything else that came out that year. I'll say that. And it's very bold, again. Like, it's like his early stuff, where it's completely unique. And it's also... Yeah. It is incredibly well represents kind of like British culture, which is something you don't really, like I say, in British films, they always seem to be kind of geared at an American audience as well. And I feel like, I mean, it's the same. I saw a really interesting thing with Tarantino actually on a podcast, and like Joe Rogan or something, talking about how he felt that the 80s kind of became this time where films were all about self-improvement, of like, working on yourself, and it's like all the films are about a guy who starts off bad, becomes good in a way, right. And then apparently he said that he thinks nowadays it's about a character. There's almost this energy of culturally of like, there's something bad but it's all society's fault, and instead of it being self-improvement, it's all about trying to improve society, but in some cases not in the best productive ways. But
I would agree with that. You said you heard that on Joe?
Yeah, Joe Rogan. He did really good.
I actually don't agree with him on a lot of things, but I 100% agree with that, because it's sort of the film industry in general has sort of reflected the vibe and ideals of society in whatever specific era. So if you look at films from the 50s, they look like ads from the 50s, like it's polished, and there's always the wife at home working in the kitchen, And then in the 60s, that started to change, the 70s, blah, blah. So that makes perfect sense. That's why, like, every fucking 80s movie has a scene in a sports club or a gym or something. Self-improvement.
Yeah, it's all like getting better. And then I feel like, and I think they said the kind of to the effect, and again, this is kind of loosely quoting, but it was to the effect of like, now it's kind of, it represents this, throw all your problems on society because it's society's fault, and don't have any self-improvement because you're perfect with all your flaws. And in some cases, good advice. In other cases, it can be counterproductive perhaps, but it's interesting how art can reflect the time it's made in. That's what I've always found. So one of the incredible things is you kind of, whether it be painting, a song, or anything, it kind of naturally takes on, parts of the world at that time. But no, it's I really know what you mean about everything becoming more polished, kind of moving into the 80s. I feel like, in a way, film lost its personality in a way. It became more almost like a group of, like a board of directors' ideas as opposed to an individual artist. I think maybe the 90s, I think it's funny because music was the same, so I think maybe it's informed by a culture, but I think in the 80s, you kind of, I feel like in music in the 60s and 70s was like film. You kind of had it really kind of, risky and raw and like really diving into stuff. And then in the 80s, it kind of gets a bit clean and polished. And then in the 90s, you have grunge, and at the same time, you have Tarantino coming out with Reservoir Dogs and all this. And it kind of, and obviously the early 2000s, there were some great films, like No Country for Old Men, There'll Be Blood.
Well, it's interesting too, because you got me thinking about the 80s is basically the Reagan era. And when Reagan got elected, there was a bit of a Baptist revival happening in the United States, where it really heavily informed parental decisions, what the parents made acceptable for their kids to digest. If they wanted them to keep going to the theaters, gritty cop movies, horror movies where little girls are telling you that your mother sucks cocks in hell, those aren't going to fly in a Reagan Baptist revival era. What's going to fly are silly movies where the ideals that are more likely to be adopted by people like that will be accepted. And then, oh, sure, you want to take your girl to go see a movie? Sure, you can go, because all the movies out there are now safe. They weren't safe in the 70s, but they're safe now.
I think one of the good things that I really enjoyed coming out of, like, when I look, well, I say coming out, I obviously didn't experience it firsthand, but looking back at kind of 80s cinema, I really always loved, and a film that really inspired me as a kid was Back to the Future and that series. But the thing was interesting is I watched an interview with the guy who played Marty's dad. I think his name is like Christopher. I've forgotten his name. Chris.
He was only in the first one. He got fired.
Yeah.
I forget his name because he got fired. He's not as big as he could have been. But yeah, I know who you're talking about.
And
he talks like this.
Yeah, that's the one. He did this podcast, and it's so, I find it really cool because he basically was really kind of, he really cared about the art. And apparently what happened was he had a lot of problem with the end of the film being about commercial success. He said the reward should be his family and, the connection. He said he hated the idea that at the end Marty got this truck. Yeah. It's kind of like, oh, he's got the product placement at the end. It's great. He's got the credit card. He's rich suddenly.
Well, they fixed that. They fixed that though. They fixed that at the end. At the end the other one.
Although apparently the original script, this is what, according to him, in the second film, they wanted it to be that Doc and Marty both got the sports magazine to deliberately go and make money. And he said, because he started off in talks about the second film, and he basically, apparently it had an ending which was really commercially led. And so they kind of had this thing of, where he really argued with the writers saying this, and in the end, obviously they changed it and they wrote it so it wasn't, and obviously it ends up that Biff takes it and all this. But apparently originally the idea was that Marty and Doc deliberately say, oh, we can make money out of this and kind of go back or something crazy, but basically that was a famous lawsuit because they they wouldn't agree to the rate his manager wanted, and he had loads of arguments about how the script was going to go. So obviously they fired him, and they used the cast of his head and screen tests on, and like they put it on another actor, obviously. And that's interesting because that lawsuit is going to come into play with some of this deep fake stuff that's going to start happening, where it's kind of like, how can you copyright your face kind of thing, which is kind of weird to think about, but I think it's going to become a real reality, because you could just put Brad Pitt in your film, for example, with CGI, with a deep fake, and it's like, does he have the right to his face? Well, of course he does, but like, that's a really interesting area.
Yeah, I think the legislation, there's going to be definitely some new legislation that's going to have to protect, especially in the era of people being like accused of things, right?
Yeah, and
The
like
moment you're
cancel culture.
accused, it's hard to crawl your way back, whether you're innocent or not.
Yeah,
And so you could make a video of somebody who's perfectly nice person doing a heinous thing and have it look so believable. And you can make those things look believable. We're going to have to introduce legislation that is so brutal to anybody who would do something like that, that it just shuts the whole technology down. Because I do think deepfakes are the worst technology to be invented.
It's scary. I mean, I got hired with a friend by I won't name, but probably the biggest UK sports provider, to do basically a treatment for a UK commercial for a big sporting event, and they want to use deep fakes. I'd like to kind of, on various, I can't obviously without going into detail, but we had to learn how to use it, and like I sort of started like experimenting with it, and I was like, this is this is free open source software. Anyone can download it. This is this has a real danger,
I mean, you could use that software too. And I'm not doing this to give anybody ideas. I'm doing this so that we could put warning bells up. You could start a war. You could get people murdered. You could break up families. You could end people's careers. It's too powerful of a technology, given that we live in a culture where people don't research whether something's real or not before acting on information or disinformation.
And it's dangerous. I mean, they did a voice deep fake. This really tripped me out. Where basically they got a series of public figures. I think Joe Rogan, people like Jordan Peterson, people like this, and they took hours of like lectures or podcasts, and they were able to clone the voice and type, and it was a free website, and you could go in, let's say, and I think you could go on like Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson, type in anything you wanted, press a button, and it used the cloud, and it sounded, and people started uploading to YouTube, Joe Rogan says this or so and so, and you think, when that becomes just a step better to indistinguishable, like how will we know what is real at all in the digital world? It's like, will there be a way?
That's why we need legislation, and
Definitely.
we need to make doing stuff like that, the punishment to be so brutal that people will think twice. Because with all the political divisions, I mean, I don't know how it is there, but here, we're really struggling not to have a civil outbreak. And it's just like, people are going to use that shit to try and swing elections.
Yeah,
it's going
definitely.
to happen. And the only thing that's going to keep people from considering it seriously is if there's a really bad repercussion for them personally.
I agree, and I feel like there'll also be almost like cryptocurrency or NFTs. I feel like what's going to happen is there'll be some way of validating, with like blockchain technology, what's genuine. So unless it is, everyone assumes it's rubbish. So like if it comes out of like a real trailer, it has some kind of, like the way that obviously they're selling art as like NFTs now, where it somehow it confirms that that's the original copy. I feel like they'll have to do that. So if it's like a trailer comes out for a film, unless it's the one that's actually, genuine, and is that original trailer, that people will just have to start assuming that it could be manipulated.
Yeah, and I think that we certainly have talent in Silicon Valley who can write the algorithms to get us started on that. But then also, and this is a very simple solution, check marks, So right now there's a debate going on Twitter because Danny DeVito, he put out a tweet saying that he was in favor of Nabisco workers forming a union. Well, Nabisco advertises on Twitter, and Twitter didn't like that tweet, so they removed Danny DeVito's verification status. So he no longer had a check mark.
Oh,
And so Twitter's using the check mark or the verified user as a weapon. And what needs to happen is everybody, you and me, who are nowhere near at the status of Danny DeVito when it comes to followers, have to be checkmarked. They have to know that what is being put out there is actually coming from us.
yeah.
And if it's not, that's the stuff that the algorithm should be filtering out of our feeds, not our own friends' comments.
I agree.
Danny
I agree
DeVito that isn't Danny DeVito for real. Instead, they're using verification as a weapon.
It's true, and
super weird.
Yeah. And Twitter especially. I mean, I know that there's many stories of them sort of removing stuff, or oh, I don't agree with that, so I'm going to take that down. Obviously, in some cases, if it's false information that could be harmful, but also you ask yourself, where's that line drawn? Who draws that line between what gets removed and what stays up?
And that's the interesting era we're living in, and that's gonna and I think that's gonna come through. If we're not seeing it already, we're gonna see it in retrospect. A lot of our art is going to reflect that negotiation, because that's the toughest question we're dealing with right now.
And even with art, I feel like it's like, where can you draw the line between artistic expression and having to conform out of fear of overstepping a mark somewhere? And,
actually, yeah, I dealt with that question back in 2008 when I was building this. I was kind of building an asshole persona for YouTube. Where I would rant about shit that didn't matter, and I would say things that were just politically divisive, not because I believed him, but because it was just part of what I think this character would do, and people couldn't tell the difference. So it was just like and it's just like, we honestly, like, in the age of different, we're in the age of information, and we're at risk of being in the age of disinformation. And so we got to figure out how to deal with all this, how to negotiate all this. And
it's tough as well, because I feel like social media has kind of turned everyone into their own PR person in a way, because it's kind of like, because we now have ended up in this place where everything you do, there's permanent record of it, it's always there. And obviously we're living in this cancel culture and obviously there are instances where if someone is actively doing stuff that's, causing harm to other people, then that's something that people need to decide, how that person, fits into a society. But what troubles me sometimes is if someone has done, made a mistake in their past online, but then have completely gone down a different path in life and completely, how accountable can they be? And also, how much does that reflect the art they do? Which is I know it's a hot topic as well, but it's...
I think that if they've gone down, and obviously we're not going to solve it here, but
no,
I think that if they've proven that they've gone down a different path in life, it doesn't matter what they tweeted 10 years ago or whatever. But we live in a vicious society where everybody's trying to take down one another, and I don't know.
It's like that. It goes back to the kind of 80s self-improvement, and now it's like blame everything and everyone, because it's a crazy, it's kind of like this mob mentality sometimes. Whereas you see crazy stuff, because obviously there are some cases where you see stuff and you think, okay, that that's justifiable. But there's some stories I've read where you have, someone who in their teenage years made a very poor taste joke or something, and then in their sort of like 30s now, their art is suddenly being pulled off a platform or being, discredited purely on the basis of. And you think it's like it's kind of gone in a very strange way, where it's like, I say, everyone's almost their own PR person, where it's like you have to, everything you say you have to edit to make sure that it's coming across as if it's part of some machine, which is really, it's a strange responsibility to give to everyone. That,
Yeah.
yeah, and I don't know what that is going to lead to.
And I can tell you, if there was social media when I was a teenager, I would have been shut down over and over and over again. People say stupid stuff when they're young. So hopefully we can find our way out of this era in that regard. I'm hoping so.
Yeah, and I think with every era, you kind of get this thing where you take, as the next, phase comes along, you take what worked and you abandon what didn't. And I think that's kind of when you take a step back and look at the context, you kind of say, okay, well, there's always this progression where, we're always testing how far can we go, how far, and then you kind of hopefully figure it out. But I do have this feeling that we're about to enter, and I may be completely wrong, but I get the feeling that we're about to enter into an era of like the 70s and the 90s again, where everything has been in the early 2000s sort of up to sort of now has been so kind of robotic that I think there's going to be a bit of a backlash, and suddenly art is going to, come back into the view a bit more. And I feel like it's already starting to happen. Like even like Joker kind of represents where like a big corporatized movie franchise does something artistic and it's hugely successful. And I just feel like it's, that would be great. I think if there was another era of just personality again.
Yeah. I think that's a good, I think, button for this podcast to end it on, because it brings us full circle at a little over 2 hours. That's how long we've been going. And it also ties in with everything we've been saying. The growth of the artist, the growth of civilization, taking what works into the next era.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
And art and commerce, fractals. I like it. It's kind of come around. No.
It is a fractalization. It's a topic that's been fractalized for your sake, listeners.
Yeah, no, that was really not, it's really, I feel like that went in a very interesting direction. Yeah.
No, this is a great talk, man.
Yeah, likewise.